The initial Allied capture of Tobruk in January 1941 was relatively easy compared to the next task faced by those soldiers. The harsh desert conditions were not the only thing the Allies faced. They would soon be introduced to a new enemy. In today's video, we look at the siege of Tobruk and the Allied efforts to stop the Germans from capturing it. Following the capture of Tobruk, the Allied forces held strong positions in North Africa, but this would be short-lived. Hitler had seen enough from the efforts of his Italian counterparts and sent a man who would forge a fearsome reputation. Erwin Rommel was essentially sent to North Africa to avoid a total collapse of Axis forces in the region. Word had reached Europe that the Italian forces were giving up key positions too easily. Rommel would round up the German troops, known as the Afrika Korps, and together with the Italians, would push the Allies back towards Egypt. Rommel would have instant success. In April 1941, his forces would capture the town of Benghazi. They continued moving forward in pursuit of the retreating Allies, who had stretched their forces and supply lines too far. Within a matter of days, Rommel's forces were closing in on the Egyptian border. Only Tobruk stood in his way. As mentioned in the previous video, Tobruk was a key port city on Libya's coast. It allowed for vital supplies to be delivered in the area. Rommel knew this, and realised he would need Tobruk if he was to push into Egypt and successfully hold ground. The Allies made a decision to hold Tobruk at all costs. They already had a large reserve of supplies and water in the town, and if this were to fall into German hands, it would be a crushing blow. On the 10th of April, the Germans cut the Tobruk to Bardia road. The last Australian forces pulled back into Tobruk before the Germans launched their first infantry attack on the outer defences. The outer perimeter was about 43 kilometres, or 27 miles in length, and known as the Red Line. This first attack was defended with heavy losses to the Axis forces. The German and Italian troops continued to move around the town, and by the afternoon of the 11th of April, it was completely surrounded. There were around 14,000 Allied troops stuck in Tobruk. The majority of these were from the 7th and 9th Australian Divisions. But further to that were a number of British machine gunners and an Indian infantry regiment. They had a handful of tanks and armoured cars at their disposal, but were well and truly outgunned. Day after day, the Germans and Italians would put pressure on the poor Allied soldiers stuck in Tobruk. The defenders just inside the Red Line were protected by anti-tank ditches, barbed wire and minefields, but were on the end of constant ground assaults and shelling from artillery, as well as bombing from the Luftwaffe. On the 1st of May, the Afrika Korps made a serious assault to attempt a breakthrough. Despite a prolonged bombardment and the deployment of flame-throwing tanks, the attackers were again thrown back. At the same time, efforts from the Australian and British navies maintained a supply line from the Mediterranean. Rommel's momentum slowed and his push towards Egypt halted for the moment. The siege went on for several more months. Every day the defenders inside were subjected to the high temperatures, lack of supplies, flies, fleas, and illnesses, as well as the constant bombardment from the Germans. They were famously referred to as the poor desert rats of Tobruk. The health of the troops stuck inside got so bad that the Australian commander believed they would be incapable of deflecting any further attacks. So Operation Treacle was born. Under the cover of darkness on the 18th of August, some 5,000 men of the Australian and Indian forces were pulled out of Tobruk. They were replaced by Polish and Czechoslovakian forces. The operation involved 3 destroyers and a mine layer working in pairs. They would dock in the port of Tobruk and allowed only 30 minutes to offload their replacement troops and board the siege survivors before disembarking. 2 further naval operations took place in September and October, evacuating further troops. Only one of the original units, part of the Australian 13th Infantry Battalion, could not be evacuated and were forced to remain until the end of the siege. This would come on the 7th of December, when Rommel was forced to abandon the siege and fall back towards Tripoli. The siege lasted a total of 242 days. For the Allies, it was a costly battle, with nearly 4,000 casualties. However, the bravery showed by the defenders ultimately helped throw back the Germans. What did you think of the siege of Tobruk? Why do you think the Axis powers couldn't gain a foothold in the town? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section down below. As always guys, thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that subscribe button if you want to expand your knowledge and join the growing Premier History community.